Next question is for Roya. As historic OSU student body president, what diversity and inclusion changes do you want to see on campus? What are ways that we to pursue authentic cross-cultural and cross-ethnic relationships on and off campus?
Yeah. So when it comes to diversity and inclusion on college campuses, I think it's something that we really need to dissect and understand what we mean when we're saying diversity and inclusion. Because from my personal experience on Ohio State's campus, a lot of it is very short-term bandage solutions, things that can make people feel heard, make people feel supported in the moment for a year, maybe even 2 years. But when you're looking at the root of the issue, when you're looking at what is consistently causing this and causing students to be angry and to feel unsupported by their university, those are the issues that are never being addressed. So since we're on the topic of policing, when we talk about policing on college campuses and universities, that's a really big conversation because for years in our undergraduate student government here at Ohio State, we've worked around police reform. We have done everything from in 2014, our student body presidents went straight down to the CPD headquarters and had a really poor experience there. For years, we've had safety task forces with students and our campus as well as city police departments talking about how Black fraternity houses are constantly targeted. Black students on our campuses are constantly targeted by both police departments. Every single year, it's the same conversation of implicit bias trainings, of you need to do better, of cultural competency, all of these things. And from my perspective as a leader, I'm personally no longer interested in those solutions. I think that I am of the belief that if you try something multiple times and it's not working, it's time to look at it from a different perspective. So we recently, through undergraduate student government, as well as the student government of graduate and professional students, we demanded that our university cut ties with the Columbus Police Department as a university, which would decrease the police presence of the CPD from football games to campus events, and just the additional presence of those officers. And that was specifically in light of the treatment of protesters and the aggressive violence that was brought on by the Columbus Police Department. And with that demand, we obviously got a lot of criticism. There was, is that necessary? Why don't you try to fix the police? Why don't we set you up a meeting with the Columbus Police Department? And the thing that we really try to hone in every time is, why do we keep trying to strive for solutions that haven't worked and consistently haven't worked? Who are we to say that college students who are saying the same things that every single person around this nation is saying, are they going to listen to the fact that we feel violated by police on our campus just because it's coming from us this time? So really what we're trying to do now is hold our university to the standard that they're expected to listen to their students, that as students, we know what is best for us. I think the relationship that students have with university administrators can sometimes feel, it's a lot of times it's someone telling you all of the reasons why something doesn't work, but then you look at another school and you see it's working here. You look at University of Minnesota and they were successfully able to decrease the police presence of the Minneapolis Police Department on their campus. You look at the city of Minneapolis and their local schools were able to cut ties with the Minneapolis Police Department. You look at Columbus and you see Columbus City Schools were able to do the same thing in removing school resource officers. So this was really an attempt for us to really demand more than just diversity and inclusion, demand more than just a task force, demanding more than just research dollars being put into how to research racism, because the answers are out there. The people have been doing the work. It's a matter of how do you hold your leadership accountable to taking the radical action that the community is asking for. And that's a really big reason why, as student government, we made sure to have people sign on to our letter. We had over 21,000 signatures. So for student government, that's a lot because not a lot of people participate in student government. So that's really just a call to show your university that people want more than just the steps that have been taken in the past. So when it comes to diversity and inclusion and cultural competency and all of those things, I think it's really important to be critical of what things work where. In some situations, programming and implicit bias trainings do work. In some spaces, it does work. But we are of the belief that when it comes to policing and that when it comes to a lot of the institutional level issues that are constantly pressing down on Black students, programs and trainings just aren't enough anymore. So.
Thank you. And I actually do have a follow-up question for Kevin. As a student leader at Harvard, what are some diversity and inclusion efforts you would like to see on your campus or other Ivy League schools?
Black people. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see more Black people in as many places as we can fit them. I remember my freshman fall, there was a month where I was very sick. I was going to our health services. I went to our health services like every single day for 2 weeks. And the doctor who treated me was this white lady. And each time she told me to go back home and take ibuprofen. I was not eating. I was not drinking anything. And eventually I went at like 4 a.m. after a month of like pain and like struggling to eat. And she's like, oh, wow, I finally see something. And she sent me to the emergency room and I got a course of antibiotics that I could have gotten from her. And I got a $2,000 to $3,000 emergency room bill that my parents were not very happy about. I can't imagine that if that doctor had been a Black woman or a Black man, that they would have treated me the exact same way. I can't imagine that I would have gone back to them so many times in one single month and gotten the sort of treatment that I received from her. I know a lot of people who use our mental health services have reported the fact that there's only one Black counselor for a university that's comprised of, right now, almost 50% people of color, students of color. That should not be the case. I think we need Black doctors, we need Black counselors, we need Black administrators, we need Black professors. We need people who, like I said, don't have to sympathize with our issues because they get our issues, and because of that, they're able to take that into account. I think it's important to note that, like, despite asking for institutional change, like, Harvard is at its core made up of people. And I don't think you can ask for institutional change without first demanding interpersonal change. I think that we need to look at the people that we're interacting with on a day-to-day basis and ask for accountability from them. We shouldn't be, like, I think at my school, one thing that's very popular is the notion of the white guy who plays devil's advocate in your like social studies class and brings up the slightly discriminatory, slightly subversive point. Oh, but he's like, oh, I'm just playing devil's advocate. And you get the professor who's like, okay, I'll allow it. My sophomore spring, I had a guy who stood up and actually said, oh, I think I would like not have to worry about thinking about what to do. I would have enjoyed being told what to do for myself. And I just remember looking back at him like, you're not okay. And listening to our professor just kind of allow that to happen was like, really, I'm paying tuition to listen to this white man tell me that he'd like to be a slave. So like I said, I think institutionally it's one thing. I think more representation is always important, but also demanding that interpersonal accountability, saying, okay, enough is enough. I will not accept this. If you want to talk, like, you know, I think people know what they're supposed to say. And for some reason, individuals just ignore that sort of attention filter.
And I can just speak briefly to that. When I was on Harvard's campus about four years ago now for law school, I mean, the devil's advocate stuff, I mean, you talk about social studies class, man, you had a lot of these law students who were trying to talk about all these different hypotheticals and why this is not racist and all this other stuff like that. It got to the point where, and we see it even in places like Ohio State, where there's this idea that the people who are being silenced, the people who are being oppressed, are the ones who can't say their racist, intolerant opinions. Like somehow those are now the people who've become the victims of oppression. And it's absolutely garbage. I mean, period, plain and simple. And sadly, though, because we like to talk about free speech and all these types of things, what we tend to do is not talk about the type of speech that actually comes up to be a course of conduct that creates a hostile environment for people. And so it does need to be addressed, and you can still uphold the values of free speech and not allow this type of behavior and conduct to just go rampant, right? Because we see it happen on college campuses all across the country. I remember doing a free speech thing at Ohio State and doing it at Harvard, and we see this thing happen over and over again. Well, don't just police what I'm trying to say and they're trying to silence my free speech views. When those views start to become hostile towards other people in the environment that they're in, that can't be tolerated. And sadly, we have created climates that have tolerated that on the notion of not wanting to take sides. When it comes to racial justice, there's only one side.
I want to quickly add on to Kevin's point too. I think it's also really interesting to mention that, because you also have to consider like how much labor and like emotional exhaustion comes into with just one, being a Black student on a college campus, but also two, being a Black student who is like, for whatever reason, constantly responsible for anti-racism on a college campus. And like, I feel like that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but like when you are in spaces such as like being a student leader, whether that's like an organizer or in student government like myself, like you are walking into these spaces and doing all of this advocacy, one, for free, so let's talk about that, but two, you are also doing it and like you're not just advocating for like students and like the people around you, but like you are defending your identity in those spaces. And that has a really incredible mental toll. Like I'm remembering like my meetings when after I released the letter demanding police divestment, and I'm walking into these rooms and people are like, people are asking me like, what happened to protesters? And this is 10 days after the fact. And I'm like, what do you mean what happened to protesters? Like, do you not see the news? And like, you'll talk about all of the experiences that Black and brown students are having on campus with police, and someone will tell you, oh, but so-and-so had a great experience with police, so-and-so usually being a white student. And I'm like, that's great, but we're talking about what is happening to Black and brown students, and we're talking about the violence that is happening on campus, and why does that have to negate what is happening, not just to students, but I'm talking about me. Like, so you are walking into these spaces and it's very personal and it's also very political, and it's very hard to separate that and to constantly expect that labor from students. So I'm going into a space and someone's trying to tell me, well, police aren't targeting people, or it's not that bad. And you're telling that to someone whose family was targeted by the FBI for 7 years. Not just as a Black family, but as a Muslim family too. So it's like, and it's just like this like far removed kind of like nuanced situation. And I think that doesn't only apply for like Black students, but like Black leaders everywhere. So like, even when we're talking about representation and we need more Black people in X, Y, and Z spaces, like we also have to remember like how much damage those spaces can cause them. And we also have to remember, like, can people handle being the person that is expected to do anti-racism work? Do they want to do that anti-racism work? And it's just always important to remember how much labor is being put on our communities as leaders. So.
But that's really what we're talking about, is dismantling the system. Right. This is what systematic racism looks like in its entirety. Kevin, your entire story from top to bottom, from not being validated by the medical professionals to not having the support that you needed from professors or whoever. And we're not even talking about officers at this point. That work and to what Ms. Roya just indicated as the experience of a young Black leader on campus, that work will continue to be onerous for all of us without the intentional injection of people of color in all areas, right, in all spaces. It makes no sense to me that you are the first Black president for the Ohio State University. It just makes no sense. When I was on campus, I was protesting, I was leading marches for the very same things that we're talking about right now. And, you know, I just graduated last year. So, you know, but it just makes, that was a joke. It just makes no sense that we are still talking about first, but then it does make sense that we're still talking about first because we operate in a systematic of a system of racism that permeates every single area of our life. And until we start dismantling that, if you want to talk about defunding and breaking something apart, that's what we need to really start putting our energy towards. Because without doing that, nothing will ever change for us. We will continue to always carry that burden. We will continue to always have to be the first to make any type of headway in our respective areas.
Wow, that was a lot. I appreciate you all being open and honest with your experiences. Kevin at Harvard, Roya at OSU, and Councilmember Shayla and Kyle, thank you all for participating in that. And Roya, as a student at OSU, I'm excited to see what you are going to do with the rest of us in USG to really change campus and put Black students at the forefront of that movement and challenge the system at Ohio State. So thank you.